Yo, what's up, guys? Alright, so today's topic is going to be damage in PoE. I'm going to take you through exactly how it's all calculated and how to get the most out of your character. So this information is absolutely vital to making an effective character in Path of Exile. But not only is it going to allow you to make your own characters in Path of Exile, which are really good, do tons of damage and stuff like that, it's going to allow you to understand everyone else's characters, like all the streamers, my characters, and all that kind of stuff. 100% better. You're going to understand every single choice and you're going to know how it works instead of just blindly following us through the darkness and just taking what we take. So, with this information, you're going to be able to kind of make decisions on your own a little bit and tailor the character to your play style as opposed to just copy and paste. So let's get straight into it. There's a lot to talk about, so it's going to be a bit of a long video. So make sure you got a drink or something, and we'll get straight into it. So just to start off with, I'm going to bring up our spreadsheet here. So to do with damage, there's about 9 different steps of how it gets calculated. And that might sound like a damn lot of steps, but it's not that complicated once you actually get into it. And we're going to start off with step 1 here. So step 1 is flat damage. So what is flat damage? I'm going to explain it now to you basically, and it's really simple to understand. So your flat damage on one of your skills, so let's use EK for example. So when I'm using my skill, we've got EK here. At its core, if I had nothing else on my character and was just using the EK gem, here's how much damage it would do. It would do 509 to 763, and it's got a 6% critical strike chance, and it has a mana cost and stuff like that. So with that in mind, that's the flat damage for spells. It's just whatever it sells on the spell actual gem, and same with the critical strike chance, just keep that in the back of your mind for later. Whatever it says on the gem, that's what you want to know. So now that we have that all sorted, we know what flat damage is for spells. How about weapons and stuff like that? So for weapons, it's a little bit more complicated, and we'll kind of get into that now. So it's kind of similar to spells. As you can see here, we've got some flat damage on this one. We've got some physical damage, so 49 to 147 for this staff. We've got a 6.5 critical strike chance. We've got a weapon range, which isn't too important for this video. We've got an attacks per second. So this is all very cool. Basically the way it's working is it's exactly like the spell. We've got our flat kind of amount there. We've got our crit amount, and we've got our attacks per second. So really, really cool stuff. But now we need to go into a bit more detail on weapons. So with weapons, it's really important to know that all of the stuff on the weapons are called what's referred to as local modifiers. And basically what a local modifier is, it's stats that will always apply to the weapon base. So this is a weapon base, as we talked about earlier, 49 to 147 damage. But something like Brightbig also has a weapon base of a Warhammer, but you'll notice that a lot of this text is in blue. So what this means is the base damage is being multiplied by a few stats on the item. So as you can see here, Brightbig has a 65% increased physical damage mod on it. So if we put that 65% increased physical damage mod on this staff here, you just increase the tooltip there by 49 to 147 and then times it by that 65%. It's important to note as well that qualitying an item, I actually don't have any whetstones right now, but you can see that Brightbeak has 20% quality on it. That also counts as another 20% increased physical damage mod on all the items. So that's really important to know. So this item essentially has 85% increased physical damage. So that's really cool, and that's really important to know. So that would still be considered our base, like EK. So when we're calculating everything, these are the bases that we're using. So it's when you're calculating a weapons base, you have to put all the stats on the weapon onto the weapon before you go on to the next steps of calculation. This also applies with attacks per second. So you can see Brightbeak has 50% increased attack speed. If we put 50% increased attack speed on this weapon over here, it would be around 1.7 instead of 1.15. And we'd use that as our base number to then calculate further later on. It's the same with crit. If we have increased critical strike chance on Imperial stuff, let's say 50%, you would get something like another 3.25% crit on the base here, and you'd be looking around 10% base critical strike chance. So now that we understand bases, and that's all clear and dandy, we do need to talk about one little more thing, and it's when we have a dagger or something like this, which says it's increased critical strike chance for spells, or it's like global increased critical strike chance, and some modifiers like that. So when it says global, it means it's not applying to the weapon, because remember, the weapon modifiers are called local. Obviously, the weapon modifiers won't say they're local, they'll just say 65% increased physical damage and like 50% increased attack speed and stuff like that. But those are considered local. And then when you have stuff like global increased critical strike chance or increased critical strike chance for spells and weapons and stuff like that, those are applied later in the next phase, so just remember that. I'll come back to this weapon in a second, but you can see there that that one up the top there is a global critical strike chance. Very, very important to remember, and we'll move on now to phase 2. So that's going to be great. So in terms of phase 2, what we have here is the game is then after you've got your attack of your weapon. So let's say you swing, it's going to grab the base damage, that's all cool. Now we're going to do added damage to attacks on spells. So on a lot of the Abyssals and stuff like that, you'll notice that they have stuff on them like, if I can find one here, 12 to 15 fire damage to spells, or stuff like that. Maybe it's to attacks, anything like that. So basically it's going to take your weapon base, and then it's going to add all the additive stuff on top. So wherever it says adds 12 to 15 fire damage, cold damage, lightning damage, anything like that, that's where this goes into, and it's going to get calculated with the base, so it'll slap them together. So you got your base damage plus your added damage, and they'll be rolled in together, and then that'll be then taken as one value, and then moved on to the next phase. So in addition to that, you just need to remember that putting damage as flat amounts is very powerful in this game, and having a strong base value for everything in the calculations, so a strong base crit value on a skill, which is like on EK has a 6%, that's very strong. This Brightpeak has 6.25, that's very strong. And it's very important to understand that baseline value. There are also skill gems and stuff like that in the game, which will add to the baseline. So a really good example here is the increased critical strike chance support. As you can see here, supported skills have plus 1.9% to critical strike chance. So what this does is it basically will take your base or your skill here, your ethereal knives, and it'll take what the calculated base value is. So on Brightpeak it's 6.25, and then it'll just add an extra 1.9 on top of that. So it's important again to know that the local critical strike chance on Brightpeak isn't going to multiply the 1.9 over here. They're separate things. So basically you have your weapon, and then you add on the other additional flat modifiers on after that. So with, in the case of ethereal knives, I technically will have a 7.9% critical strike chance as my base because of the critical strike chance gem. So that's really important. So phase 2 of, step 2 of phase 1 is complete now. So that's phase 1. We understand base damage. So you've got your base spell and your base weapon and all that stuff, all the local modifiers and stuff like that. And then you've got your added damage to spells and attacks. You got that added percent flat crit, stuff like that. All the added flat damage goes in this category and will be creating your baseline damage. So now that one's out of the way, that's kind of probably the most complicated one. We can go on to damage conversion. So this is basically the one which got the most attention this expansion. There's a lot of different items which give you a lot of damage conversion in this patch, and I want to go into a few examples here and how they work. So with EK, it's the perfect example here, and I'm also going to use that dagger I talked about in the last few videos. Here it is. So basically what damage conversion is there's two different types. There is what's called percentage conversion of one type of damage to another, which is going to be items like this here. These gloves say on it 50% of physical damage is converted to cold. So after your flat damage, you're going to get that, right? And then you're going to convert it into cold damage straight up, which is really cool. So on ethereal knives, if I just take out all my other gems here, we're going to see when I put it in, we got it on now. Just make sure I don't have any auras on. I'll turn that off. Oh, there we go. We can see here that it mainly does just physical damage. The other little bits of added things here and there are just from a few of my skill points and some jewels in the tree. So just ignore those. But when we put the gloves on, you're going to notice that it's basically going to give you half and half cold damage. The reason it's not half and half is, again, because of my skill tree. I have a few elemental damage nodes and stuff like that, which are increasing the amount of cold damage. But basically what this is doing is it's just halving my damage, half physical, half cold. And then we also have another effect here which says 20% of physical damage converted to lightning. So this is a similar thing. If I show you the EK here, so you got physical damage, and then when I do this, it's going to convert some of it to lightning. So we can see there, it's converted to lightning. So this is what phase 2 is all about. There is also another step of conversion, which happens before this. It's really important to note that this one happens before it. So this is the stage 2. So the kind of stage 1 of conversion, which I'll show you now, here is adds damage as a percentage of another type of damage. So basically what this one does is you'll notice abilities like Hatred. It says you and nearby allies gain 36% of your physical damage as extra cold damage. So what this means is basically you've got your base physical damage, and then what you're going to do is grab 36% of that and whack it on top as cold damage, which is pretty incredible. I'll illustrate that here for you now. So I'll take these gloves off so you can see. So we've got our 30k physical damage, and then you put on, we'll just wait for that to tick back down. Come on, there we go. You can see here that we have a lot of our physical damage added as cold there. So we've got around 38% added as additional cold. And it's important to note that that cold damage won't go down. So you might be thinking, if I convert my damage to cold and I've got 50% physical, then will I only get added 38% of that 50% that I just converted as additional cold damage. That's not how it works. This happens first, and then afterwards you'll do your conversion. So that's really important to note. So you'll notice here that I don't lose any physical damage really any cold damage from my hatred conversion here. I just gain the physical damage conversion of cold. So this might be a bit confusing, but basically it's important to note that whenever you're using stuff like on here, gain X amount of blah as extra something, it's going to happen before the conversion, so you're not going to miss out on any damage. That's why this stat is probably one of the most overpowered in the game, because this dagger almost doubles my flat damage just by itself, so that's really important. So that's phase 2 out of the way. We now understand damage conversion and how it kind of functions. So you got your base, and then you're going to get a bunch of added damage as percentages through stuff like Hatred and Herald of Fire, and then you're going to be able to convert that damage, if you so choose, into a different element using certain items in the game. So phase 3 is the big one, guys. This is where you're going to have all your skill points in the skill tree coming in and stuff like that. So basically what we've got here is 2 different types of damage modifiers. We have what's called the increased damage modifier and the more modifier. Okay, so this is really important to understand, and I'm going to explain it now. So basically what we've calculated so far is we've got our base damage, we've done all our conversion tricks to it, so now what we're going to do is multiply it all by our skill tree passives. So when you have a multiplier like 10% increased spell damage, what that's going to do is it's going to take that base EK, let's find it here, that base EK amount, 509 and to 763. It's going to do all the conversion tricks to it, which is really cool. We'll come out with a number, and then that number is going to be multiplied by 1.1, so because it's 10%. So then we're going to get basically 10% of our physical damage here increased because of the spell power, because EK is a spell. So if we have 20%, it'll be multiplied by 1.2, 30%, 1.3. It's important to note if you have stuff like this, 18% increased lightning damage, that won't do the physical damage on EK, it'll only touch the lightning, but it will multiply our converted damage, which we did before. So if we got this cold node, our damage converted from the gloves here, as well as the additional damage from that dagger, would actually be multiplied by this increased cold damage node here. So it goes increased damage first, and then we're going to get to what's called the more multiplier. So right now we have a value after our base damage, all of our added damage, and then our converted damage. And now we've increased that and multiplied it by increased damage. So we've kind of got 4 steps here, and we've got a value currently in the game, which is probably, let's say it's 100, and then we had 50% increased, so we're going to 150, all right? So I'll put that in the spreadsheet here. After our base damage calculations and all our conversion stuff, so we've got 100 physical damage, let's say. We're going to take 5 nodes, which say 10% increased physical damage, which will give us 50% increased damage, so we'll go to 150 physical damage. So I'll just copy this down here. All right, so it's pretty good. We've got 150 physical damage. So now that we've understand increased, it's literally just a flat multiplier on your damage, as long as it lines up with the appropriate damage type. We're going to talk about more. Okay, so now that we've got that value, we can go back to the skill tree here, and we can look at something like this spell here. Sorry, this keystone here. It's called Pain Attunement. So what this says is it says 30% more spell damage. So this is completely different to increased. There is no association at all between them. They're just completely different things. So the difference between the two is that increased is going to happen before more. So when you see increased, that's step 1 of the multiplication, and then step 2 is the more spell damage or more anything multiplier. So let's go back into our spreadsheet here. When you have a more damage multiplier, it's going to take that value after it's been increased by the increased value, and it's going to multiply it again by however much it says. So if we've got that 30% there from Pain Attunement, what it's going to do is take that 150 there, so go 150, and then we're going to times it by 1.3. So now that we have that down, we've got 195. The difference between these two is if it had just been a flat 30%, we would have had 80% increased as opposed to what we have there. And it would have turned out as 180 if you didn't understand this, and you would have thought, hey, I'm not getting as much as I want here. So basically more is going to multiply everything which came before it. So that's really important. It might look a bit underwhelming in terms of comparison here, but let's just say we had 300% increased physical damage. So that's triple. So now we have 300. We can do 300 in here. And now it would have been, so our original value would have been 330 if we just added 30% on, but now it's 390. So as you stack more and more increased damage, the more multiplier becomes even more powerful. Similarly, if you stack up a lot more base damage, again, each time you go along the steps, it's going to get more and more ridiculous. You're going to get a higher and higher damage value. So that's really cool. That's the main distinction that you need to learn from this video. Increased first, it calculates the number, and then more multiplies that again. But it doesn't stop there. So we're going to move now on to critical strike chance. So basically this is going to be your chance to critical strike. You're going to hit the monster and it's going to roll a random number generator in the game. And you're going to take a look at your critical strike chance in game. So we'll put EK in here. And it's going to be a total of, let's see here, spell critical strike chance 24.3. So what it's really important to know is how you get this number is you've got your base critical strike chance, and then it's multiplied by all the critical strike chance nodes on the tree and on your gear. So remember that local modifiers will not affect this. So the local critical strike chance on your weapon will affect the base and not the total. So local critical strike chances modifiers are very much more powerful. So let's take this stuff here, 6.5% critical strike chance, we'll go 6.5. Let's say we have 50% increased critical strike chance on the tree. So we'll go like that, times a 1.5. So we end up with a 9.75% critical strike chance. If we had 300% critical strike chance on the tree, we end up with this. But if you can see here that if we increased that base amount using local modifiers to, like, let's say 9, you can see here we get a much higher critical strike chance. So increasing your base amount of crit is very powerful, and that's why a lot of people use the increased critical strike chance gem, because it's going to add 1.9% to that base amount. You can also see here that the critical strike gem actually adds 108% to your increased critical strike chance. So it's actually very easy to get a lot of critical strike chance. As you can see here, 60%, and you can see 20% there. It's very common to get up to like 400% increased critical strike chance, and that's how you get those ridiculous, almost critical strike chance capped characters. So yeah, you can stack up a lot of that. You'll also see that power charges have a lot of base critical strike chance increase, as well as critical strike chance multiplier. So that's really cool. And by multiplier, I mean increased. So why do we want to be critical strike chancing and all that kind of stuff? So basically, what critical strike chance is it's a 150% damage multiplier on your skills. So what that means is when you're hitting for that 390 we talked about earlier, it's going to be going, all right, 390, you crit, sick. So it's going to grab that 390 and it's going to times it by 1.5. Whoops, messed that one up a little bit. Just quickly fix this up. Not the best at Excel. So we're going to do that times 1.5. And wow, you can see, whoa, we just gained a lot of damage from that critical strike multiplier. But it doesn't stop there. So we can continue on because that base critical strike multiplier, which is the amount of damage we gain increased as a result of doing a critical strike chance, can also be scaled on the tree and on the gear you have here. So you can notice here, 15% critical strike multiplier for spells. So instead of 150, you'll do 165, and so on. You can stack up to like 300, 400%, even higher. That's how I'm getting so much damage on Blade Vortex character. I think I have almost 600% crit multi on that thing. So if you put in 600 instead, you can see that you're going pretty ridiculous. So that's one of the best ways to scale your damage in the game, and it's what I use on most of my characters to get the most damage out. Alright, so because I don't want this to go too long, it's probably already pretty long, I'm going to skim over this real quickly. So phase 5 is basically your chance to hit. It's calculated with a bunch of different stuff in the game. It's tested against evasion. There's also dodge and spell dodge in there if the enemies have that or if you have that. So there's that. Next phase is block. That's just going to be mitigation using a shield. In terms of all the defensive ones here, I'm going to go into them in a different video. Next one is called damage shift. So you'll see that on a lot of the new armor and on flasks like Taste of Hate, which I'll just quickly show you now. This stuff is basically saying when I get hit with something, convert it to something else. So 20% of physical damage taken as cold damage during the flask effect. So when I get hit with a physical damage attack for 100, it's going to get split. I'm going to take 80 of cold. I'm going to take 80 as physical, which I'll mitigate as physical damage, and I'll take 20 as cold, which will get mitigated by my resistances. So that's really good, and that's what that's all about. Again, I'll be making a defensive video about this kind of stuff. So that's damage shift, and then we have damage mitigation, which we're going to go into a little bit of detail here about, because this is really important. So step 1 is damage avoidance. This is just another version of kind of evasion and dodge and stuff like that. Basically, it's basically just more mitigation. It's more defensive stuff. Go into that later. Don't worry, guys. This is about damage, doing raw damage, more numbers. So that'll help you out. Next up, elemental resistances. Okay, so this is a big one, and this is one you really need to understand. So basically, in the game, elemental resistances are for fire, cold, lightning, and elemental. And chaos, not elemental. And what these do is basically, let's say this is all fire damage. I'm doing 2,340 fire damage now. If the enemy has 40% resistances, what it's going to do is it's going to take 40% of my damage and completely wipe it out. So that's basically the gist of it. So whatever 40% of this number here is, so we'll just do that now. 0.4. So I'm going to lose 936 damage here, and we'll just calculate this real quick. So minus this one here. So I go from 2,340 damage to 1,404 damage because my enemy has 40% fire resistance. So that's really important. However, we can actually abuse this system a little bit. Not even abuse, just make it work in our favor instead. So the highest elemental resistance monster I think in the game, just by itself, is Shaper. I believe he has 40% of all elemental resistances, and I think 20% chaos. Don't quote me on that though, I don't know it off by heart. So let's just say here, we're doing 2,340 damage to Shaper. Wham, we hit him with it. We lost a lot of damage, but what we can do is we can use things like some tools at our disposal. So first things first, there are nodes on the tree which are going to say a certain damage type with penetration. So down here, I've got a node here which says damage with weapons, that's really important, so it doesn't work for spells, penetrates 8% of cold resistance. So let's just pretend this is damage penetrates 8% of fire resistance for our little example here. So if we're penetrating 8% of the resistances, that's wiping out 8% of his resistances. So if he's got 40, he now has 32. So instead of 0.4 here, it's going to be 0.32. So now we're doing more damage because of that 8%. And this is one of the massive ways to make yourself do more damage against bosses. So if we took this to 0.2, you'll notice a massive damage jump here on our final calculated damage. So that's really massive. The cool thing about elemental resistances is they can go negative to infinity. There is no limit on how negative they can go. So basically, if we said, hey, we want to I don't think it's going to work with this calculation here, but basically what we can do is instead of it being a times 0.2, if we shape it a negative 20% elemental resistances for fire here, we can actually get a damage multiplier. Whoops, that's not, yeah, I didn't think it was going to work. So we want to do a plus here. So instead of, oh, that doesn't look right. Anyway, yeah, so basically the idea is here that we can get another more multiplier. So we'll just do a quick fix up that quick equation there. So we're going to do that times 1.2. And see, that's our final number there with kind of calculated DPS there. Because we've got negative 20% fire resistance on him, we're going to do 20% more damage on top of our previous calculation from the damage. So that's really cool. If you took it to negative 40, you just keep going. So I'm going to tell you a few ways to do that right now. There's a lot of ways in the game to take an enemy's resistances to negative. Probably one of the most popular ones is the curses. So basically, I'm going to bring it up here right now. You have a curse. Let's say we're doing cold damage. You can see here that cursed enemies have 25 to 44 negative cold resistances. So if I curse an enemy with frostbite, let's assume that it's not immune to curses or anything like that. It's going to have a negative 44% cold resistance at level 20 frostbite. So let's say we use it at 100% effectiveness on Shaper. We're going to rip 44% cold resist off him, which will give us a 4% damage multiplier on him on top of all of our other stuff. So that's really cool. The cool thing is you can have multiple curses as well. So if we grab elemental weakness here, as well as frostbite, we'll grab that now. Yep, cool. So we can get another 39% there, and all of a sudden we're at negative, I think, 83% cold resistances. So that's really cool. So when we go back to our calculation here, that actually gives us our damage multiplier we were talking about earlier, and then we can further stack even more damage penetration on the tree here, which I talked about earlier, and you can get pretty insane numbers of damage penetration and another more multiplier. So really, really cool stuff. Penetrating elemental resistances is really cool. If you're doing physical damage, that'll be explained in a different video. There is currently no armor penetration or anything like that in the game, but physical damage works a little bit different to elemental resistances because it works with armor instead. That's a massive topic though. This video is already too long. Let's keep going. So moving right along, we know about elemental resistances now. We know how to penetrate it. We know that we can make it work in our favor for massive damage gains. So let's move on again. Finally, to step 9. And this is again another multiplier to our damage, which is really, really cool. So basically there's things in the game which will say that stuff can take increased or decreased damage. So this is the final level of damage calculation that we're going to go into. And the example I'm going to give to you here is the Templar Ascendancy passive. So you can see here on the Templar over here, nearby enemies take 16% increased elemental damage. So basically what this does is it's going to take our value after elemental resistances and penetration, everything else is calculated, and then it's going to multiply it even more again. So we're going to grab that value again. We're going to times it by 1.16 because 16%. So then we get our final value here. So as you can see here, it's another damage multiplier on top. It's really cool. And you have the same thing here as we did over here, we've got both the increased keyword and then the more keyword. So let's say that you had another, if you had something which says enemies take 12% more elemental damage, you'd then multiply that again. So let's say we had another 12%, we'd do, if we had a 12% more damage multiplier for enemies to be taken, then we could do that here, 1.12 again, and we multiply it again, and it just keeps going higher and higher. So the more you throw into all these different calculations, it's really good. The ones towards the end are the most powerful. So elemental penetration, damage taken is the best, and then obviously more damage multiplier, and then you work backwards. But if you increase any of these at any point, obviously you're going to see massive damage gains down the line because that initial value is what spawned it all. If you have high base damage, then all these other calculations are going to be much more powerful. So hopefully you guys have learned something. This is basically everything you need to know to be able to build your damage up really well. So you want to look for those more multipliers. You want to get negative elemental resistances on your enemies and stuff like that. I just want to go over one quick one as well. One of the most effective ways to get a debuff on an enemy for them to take more damage is shock. So what shock does is you can see here shocks nearby enemies during flask effect, causing 10% increased damage taken. So that's what we were talking about earlier. It's an increased damage taken multiplier. So what that goes down here is over here. So basically shock is one of the most powerful things in the game. You get it from lightning damage when you critical strike or hit really hard with a lightning attack. The harder you hit, the more the damage increase the monster's going to take, up to 50%. So let's say we shock an enemy for the maximum amount of thing. We're a Templar as well. That's going to be like this. So you can see we get a lot more damage from shock. I'm going to be doing a video on how ailments work, so that's freeze, ignite, shock, and all that kind of stuff coming up. But I just wanted you to understand how powerful shock is and where it kind of fits into how damage works. So that's been damage, guys. Hopefully, you guys have understood everything. It's possible I've missed something, or maybe gotten it wrong a little bit. So if you've noticed anything that's a bit off, obviously this is a very complicated topic, please post down in the comments below, and I'll be able to add it to the description. And maybe when you're viewing the video, just check the description to make sure that there's not been any updates to the information in it. Thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully I can answer some questions down below. There's been a lot of comments lately, so it's hard to get to all of them, but I try my best, and I usually I'm able to read all of them, and I'll try and give everyone a thumbs up if I can. Replying takes a little bit of time though, so just be patient with me, and I should be able to get to everything that everyone wants. I've got a huge big list of videos I'm planning to make, but I'm also working on the website as well. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers, guys.